So if you had the chance to go on an expedition to the Antarctic or be part in one of the biggest wars possibly of all time, which one would you choose? So that was a choice that was facing Ernest Shackleton and his crew of explorers in 1914. They had been planning for a while to go to Antarctica on an expedition that was to cross from one end of Antarctica to the other, in fact, making them the first men to do so. However, the First World War broke out, and they had to decide, do we stay and fight for our country, or do we go on an expedition? Now, while they did face some criticism from the press, the King of England did give his okay for them to go, and they sailed off in 1914 to Antarctica. However, their ship went from looking like this to looking like this, and that's because the ice got around their ship and basically crushed it into nothing. They then had to make a harrowing journey across the ice and finally make their way back to civilization. That took them about 2 years, and when Ernest Shackleton made it back to civilization, one of his first questions was, "Tell me, when was the war over?" And the response was, "The war is not over. Millions have been killed. Europe is mad. The world is mad." Hi, my name is Justin, aka Ghost Reader, and today we're going to be doing my first video in remembering World War I. And today we're going to talk about a general overview of the First World War. Now, the First World War lasted for about 4 years, just a little over 4 years. It went from July 28th, 1914 to November 11th, 1918. In that time, the conflict spanned the globe. It was fought not only in Europe, where the major powers for the most part were, but it was also fought in the Middle East. It was fought in Africa. It was fought in the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean and in the North Sea. And also, since the combatants in this war were colonial powers, when they came into the war, places outside of Europe were also brought in. So India, Canada, New Zealand, Indochina. All of these people and places were brought in one capacity or the other to help fight the war that started in Europe. Now, there were two big alliances in the First World War. So for the Central Powers, there was the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. And for the Entente, there was the British Empire, the Russian Empire, the French Republic, Serbia, Italy, the United States, Japan, and a host of other nations. In total, 32 nations actually joined in World War I. So what caused World War I? What took these nations that were basically living in a sort of power balance to suddenly decide to march millions of men off into battle in order to settle conflict? So what caused Europe to go to war? How could a system that was so interconnected, so balanced, that looked so impervious to something like this in the age where we sat down and talked at conferences, in the age where the leading monarchies of these countries, of the British Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, were all related? How do their countries decide that we are going to go to war? Now, we're going to look at this issue in some detail in my second video. However, the trigger for this was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in 1914. He and his wife were on a trip to Bosnia, and on their official trip there, they were both assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. Now, when the trigger was pulled, it wasn't inevitable that this would go and become a war. It did seem like for a minute that things could be settled peacefully, at least, or if there was a conflict, it would just be limited in the Balkans, perhaps. So Austria goes to Serbia and says, accept these terms or we go to war. Serbia says, I can only accept some of them and we can negotiate the others. Austria's like, no. That is not satisfactory. They declare war on Serbia. However, Austria-Hungary and Serbia have allies. So Russia declares its support for Serbia, Germany declares its support for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and eventually Russia and Germany are looking at each other, telling each other to stand down. However, Germany declares war on Russia, and then also has to declare war on France because France and Russia are allies. Now, in order to try to win this war quickly, Germany has to invade France, but in order to invade France successfully, they believe they have to invade and go through Belgium to get there. Belgium, of course, is like, absolutely not, and then when Germany does invade Belgium, Britain joins the war because they have made promises to protect Belgium in case something like this happens. So basically, in about a space of a month, you go from something that could have been possibly resolved peacefully to basically all-out war that is now going to bring in people from all over the globe because Britain has Canada, New Zealand, Australia as colonies, India and France has possessions overseas as well, in Indochina. Japan is also a ally of Britain, so they also joined and declared war. Italy was also supposed to support Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire as well, but they said no, our terms of the treaty don't allow us to do this. But in 1950, they joined on the opposite side along with the French, British, and the Russians. In 1917, because of the Germans sinking a lot of merchant ships and a telegram basically offering Mexico some of the United States if they helped join in the war, the United States declares war on Germany in 1917. By 1918, both sides were exhausted. By November 11th, 1918, they decided to sign an armistice, and basically both sides declared an end to the war, with Germany and its allies basically being the losers. And in 1919, the peace conference was held that basically settled matters concerning the war, and from that grew the rest of the 20th century. So there were about 65 million men mobilized for the effort in World War I, and countless numbers of civilians who were caught up in it, either because they were part of the battlefields, because these battles were taking place where people lived, or they were involved in the labor effort. Now, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, about 8.5 million men were killed, about 7.7 million men were taken prisoner, and about 21 million men were wounded. And that's not counting all the millions of civilians that were killed and hurt also in the war. According to G.J. Meyer in The World Undone, Germany lost about 55 men an hour for a total of 1,320 men per day on average during the war. So a lot of people thought that the war would be over by Christmas. That would be a quick affair, that someone would give up or they would be beaten, and that would be the end. Something that would just be a bump along the way of progress towards a better society. However, that ended up not being the case, and instead you had a war that consumed men's lives for about 4 years. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers because some of these numbers are massive. I mean, 65 million men took either to the field or were part of the army, and 8.5 million men were killed in the space of 4 years. And while these numbers are not World War II numbers, for a society that had never seen anything of this scale before, this was quite shocking. I mean, whole villages in England lost a whole generation of youth because of this war. Same thing happened in Germany and France and other places that had a huge commitment of men to the First World War. And that is something that the numbers kind of hide, that these people are real. These are real families. These are real wounded men. These are real soldiers taking part in this event that none of them really, at that time, really could, at least in the midst of it, probably really understood in the grander picture. But as time went on, attitudes began to change. Before the war was looked at something gallant and celebratory, something that you look forward to if you were a young guy, and was sad that you no longer lived in the age where you could go off to battle like knights of old. However, by the end, with all the technology that made killing a lot more effective and a lot more devastating, not only on you physically but also on you mentally, that image of war was pretty much gone. And World War I kind of changed everything from when it happened to the present time. I mean, the war saw the end of great empires. It saw the end of the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the German Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Actually, Russia decided to go in a whole different route and went on basically a social experiment called communism. And from that, we have the Soviet Union and the Cold War of the 20th century. Also, the decisions made at that peace conference influenced a lot of the turmoil that you see in the Middle East, because it was there that the borders, essentially, for the countries that we know today were decided, and that is the cause of a lot of the turmoil that we see in the Middle East today. Also, in how Germany was treated at the peace conference, where they were simply given the terms and not really even given the chance to debate on whether or not they felt the terms were agreeable, kind of laid the seeds for the resentment that we see when Adolf Hitler decides to come to power in Germany, and that eventually led to World War II. In fact, a lot of people see World War II is simply a continuation of World War I. The World War I has really impacted us today, and whether we know it or not, our lives have been shaped by the events that happened in that First World War. And basically, the point of this series is to kind of look at that, to remember the people who lived through it, the soldiers who fought for it, and also to shine some light on how our lives have been influenced by this great event that happened and ended almost 100 years ago. So the next 10 videos I will be exploring: how did it start? What was life like for soldiers and civilians? What was it like for women? What was it like for soldiers and civilians of color in Europe? Also, I'll be looking at the literature from World War I, during and after. I'll be looking at communism and how did that come to be the main form of government in Russia. I'll be looking at technology and how it influenced the battlefield and people's lives, the 1918 flu, and also the consequences of what happened when it ended. So I hope you'll join me in this series as I look at how World War I affected not only people back then, but also how it affects us today. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos from me, please subscribe. You can follow me at GhostReads28 on Twitter, and you also can follow me on Goodreads. The link to that is down in the description box below. So as always, keep reading.